My name is Emma Lynch. I think I've met maybe just about everybody before. You're really welcome. And yeah, today's knowledge share is really about some of the work that we've been doing alongside others, particularly in the End Orphanage Volunteering Working Group in collaboration with COLOV and others, around highlighting the issue of the unintended harm that can occur through volunteering and visiting orphanages. So I'm going to look at some materials that you can use to explore this with groups. But first of all, we'll look at uh, the overall issue, just for those uh, who may be joining this or watching this online, for whom this is a new issue. And just to acknowledge, Irish Aid funded um, just the creation of this resource, just care, just volunteering, and also continue to fund workshops that we offer in this area. So I'd like you to indulge me in joining in a Menti, and just be interested to know what words come to mind for you when you think of a positive childhood. So you can join the Menti by going to menti.com and entering the code 5140 5226, or by scanning the QR code. Okay, and it would be great just if you have a phone to hand or go into another tab, menti.com. The code is 5140 5226, or there's a QR code there. And the question is just what words come to mind when you think of a positive childhood? And later on in our session, I will share the sort of things that emerged in the Menti. So just you go ahead and do that. It'd be interesting just to see what emerges, and I'll show that to you later on in the presentation. So as Tearfund Ireland, we're an international relief and development organisation. And I suppose our interest in this area stems from us working with partners in Cambodia, where the impact of overseas volunteers seeking placements to volunteer in orphanages led to an explosion in the number of orphanages between 2005 and 2010, and they're still feeling the impact in the country. The number of orphanages rose. Well, in fact, it's going to come up in the quiz, so I won't give you the answer now. But just the number of orphanages rose in Cambodia, and our partners worked basically to strengthen families, to stop the separation, the unnecessary separation of children from their families, and to reintegrate care leavers in that country. And we realised that the piece of work has to be done on this side of the world to raise awareness of the unintended harm that can occur from visiting or volunteering in orphanages, and encouraging donors to consider how they might redirect their funding to the projects that they're engaged with, to maybe see families strengthened and to build a community. So these are the areas of work that we work with, and we work closely with a lot of other NGOs. I mentioned COLOV already. We work with advocacy with the Irish government and at EU level as well. So I'll just share more about that maybe a bit later. So we're going to do a quiz here. So I'd really like you to pop your answers into the chat box, really for yourselves, but just put the answers here into the chat box. So orphanages are the most cost-effective way to care for vulnerable children, true or false? And this is a really quick quiz, okay? This is in the Just Care, Just Volunteering resource. So you will find it there. But this, just using a Menti to find out where people are at on this issue, and then just this quiz just can be really good entry points for people into the subject. Okay, what percentage of children living in orphanages in Nepal have at least one living parent? 10%, 30%, 50%, 85%. So please pop your answer into the chat box. What do you think it is? Great, I can see there's people answering. That's great. Okay, number 3. Of the more than 500 institutional care facilities in Haiti, what percentage are licensed to operate? Is it 25%, 40%, 75%, or 90%? By what percentage did the number of orphanages in Cambodia increase between the years of 2005 and 2010? 15%, 30%, 75%, or 100%? So I already touched on that, but I didn't give you the answer. By what percentage did Moldova reduce the number of children living in orphanages or institutional care between 2007 and 2013? So many countries across the world are changing the way they care for children, just as we have here in Ireland. And in Moldova, and the number of children living in orphanages between 2007 reduced by 10%, 30%, 50%, or 70%. Which country was the first to recognise orphanage trafficking, where children are deprived of their family and exploited for profit as a form of modern day slavery? Was it Kenya, Ireland, Australia, the USA? Okay, does the Irish government have a clear policy statement on Irish support for overseas orphanages and orphanage volunteering? Yes or no? And which of these countries has travel advice about the potential harmful impact of visiting or volunteering in an orphanage setting? Australia, Ireland, UK, or USA? Which of these countries has travel advice about the potential harmful impact of visiting or volunteering in an orphanage setting? Four options: Australia, Ireland, UK, or the USA. Okay, so now we're going to the answers and just see how you got on. Orphanages are the most cost-effective way to care for vulnerable children. False. Multiple studies across multiple countries have found that actually it is more cost-effective for children to grow up in family and in community than in institutions. You've got the upkeep of building, you've got salaries, etc., etc. The initial cost of reintegrating children back to family, if they are in an institution, is higher, but over the long term, those costs reduce dramatically. The percentage of children living in orphanages in Nepal that have at least one living parent who, with the right support, maybe will be able to care for them, or extended family, but the number that have at least one living parent is 85%. So different countries, it's different numbers, but overall across the world, it's 8 out of every 10 children. Of the more than 500 institutional care facilities in Haiti, what percentage are licensed or registered to operate? 25%, 1 in 4. This leaves children open to maybe substandard levels of care because there's nobody checking to see what the standards are. By what percentage did the number of orphanages in Cambodia increase between 2005 and 2010? 75%. And there was no war, there was no pandemic, there was, there was no major natural disaster in the country, and research showed that it was due to the huge increase in demand for volunteer placements, and just some people saw an opportunity there for a business model, really, to just for volunteer placements. And children were actively recruited into orphanages. By what percentage did Moldova reduce the number of children living in orphanages between 2007 and 2013, a 6-year period? By 70%. And some certainly would feel that that was done too quickly. It needs to be done safely with social workers, care support workers, family workers, etc. But they did reduce it by 70%. Which country was the first to recognise orphanage trafficking, where children are deprived of their family and exploited for profit as a form of modern day slavery? That was Australia. Does the Irish government have a clear policy statement on Irish support for overseas orphanages and orphanage volunteering? No, they don't. No, they don't. And in terms of the travel advice, all of them. Yeah, Australia, Ireland, UK, USA, all of them. And I include the travel advice from those countries later in these slides that you will have after this. So you'll be able to just see it all for yourself. So looking at this picture here, if you just have a look at it, Poor Street Children Orphanage Training Centre, this is in Cambodia. Orphanage Tourist Welcome. Just we don't really have much time now, but just to have a look at that and say, well, just is this appropriate? Is it appropriate in a tourist area just for unvetted, unregulated, and just people just to just go and visit? Whatever, I know that may seem far away and a big thing to consider, but how would we feel if it was in Temple Bar? Would that be appropriate? Just to consider ourselves, would just even any childcare setting in Ireland, a creche, could a tourist just turn up at the door and just be welcomed in? So it's just thinking around the safeguarding aspects of volunteers and tourists visiting childcare settings where very vulnerable children live. Because as soon as a child is separated from their family and community, they've already experienced a trauma. So volunteers, how appropriate is it? So the why, some of the statistics between research has been done, like lots of different studies have been done over the last 60 years on this issue and more since 2020. But between 5.4 and 8 million children, it's documented live in residential care across the world. However, it's thought the number is probably a lot higher because of the lack of licensing and registration in many places. 8 out of 10 children have at least one living parent, and children with disabilities worldwide are 17 times more likely to live in institutions than other children. The research has showed, though, that growing up in an institutional setting, an orphanage, a residential care centre, just many different names are used, has a negative impact on a child's health, development, and long-term life outcomes. So various studies have shown that young adults in orphanages are 10 times more likely to fall into sex work, 40 times more likely to have a criminal record, and 500 times more likely to take their own lives than their peers. In terms of cognitive development, studies have been done as well. There was a famous study done called the Bucharest study, just back just after Romania, after the Ceausescu regime fell in Romania. And just children who had been institutionalized, you see there in the green, whereas a never institutionalized group on the bottom right, just there's much more activity in the brain, whereas just in an institutional setting, with lack of stimulation, with lack of one-to-one interaction, just the impact on cognitive development can be stark. However, once a child is placed into a family setting, into a foster care situation, that can really be reversed over time, but it does have an impact. So in response to all the research that was coming out, it is now recognised that institutional care for children is no longer best practice and should be phased out internationally. And in 2019, for the first time ever, all 193 member states of the UN recognised the harmful impact of institutional care on children and called for it to be progressively eliminated across the world. And Ireland signed up to that, as it did, as I say, 193 countries around the world, countries that still have institutional care and countries who send volunteers to institutional care settings. So we're on the journey. The train has left the station. So it's no longer seen as best practice, but the Lancet medical group journal did a study in 2020, and then that was followed up in 2021, and they found that orphanage tourism and volunteering is helping to financially sustain an orphanage industry worldwide. So I suppose this is one of the reasons that we work on it. So there were key global messages that came out of their study on the institutional and deinstitutionalization of children. And they just said donors and volunteers should redirect their funding efforts to community-based and family-based care programs. So I suppose this is why we try and open the box around this, because pure advocacy, people find that a bit too stark, whereas GCE approaches can help people critically think about the issues leading to behaviour change. Following the UN resolution, a thematic brief has been created for governments about how to legislate or how to take action on this area. So that's just in the slides. And I'm just going to show you a very brief video here. On the Tearfund Ireland website, there are various videos of care leavers, but this is the International Trafficking Task Force, and just a clip looking at the link between orphanages and trafficking, which is sort of a new and growing area of understanding. So I'm just going to show you this clip.
Growing up in an orphanage often felt like being in a prison. I lost my identity, my culture, even my mother tongue. An institution can never be home.
Up to 8 million children live in orphanages across the world. And tragically, 80% of children in orphanages have at least one parent, many of whom could care for them with support.
When I was about 10 years old, my biological father came to visit me at the orphanage, but he was told not to return.
This unnecessary separation from their families exacerbates the vulnerability of these children, leaving them terribly exposed.
Orphanage trafficking is the recruitment or transfer of children from their families into orphanages for the purpose of exploitation and profit.
Families who are simply poor or needing support are coerced or deceived into relinquishing their children to institutions who strip them of their parental rights.
Orphanage operators have worked out that they can make a good profit from international funding and from volunteerists coming and donating money.
The sad truth is that much of the donated money never reaches the children themselves, and even donated goods are often sold by the orphanages for profit. These children often endure maltreatment, have inadequate health care and little or no education, and even suffer abuse within these facilities.
The cycle of trauma is perpetuated when volunteers form connections with children only to depart, reinforcing the belief that those who care will eventually leave.
As a teen, I actually volunteered in an orphanage in Central America where I was encouraged to interact and play with the children. And of course, my trip was well-intentioned, but when we left, many of these children were heartbroken.
Orphanage trafficking disguises as altruism. People don't think of orphanages as places that are unsafe or sites of trafficking, but the harms caused to children are significant.
Orphanage trafficking is one of the most unknown types of human trafficking, yet it impacts on the most vulnerable in society, children.
So what can be done?
We need to educate. Countries from around the world send millions of dollars to support orphanages. This money can be redirected.
Institutions are not appropriate environments for children and do not support their holistic development. Resources need to be directed towards better solutions.
Poverty is just a lack of resources. Resources we can fix. Love, you can't buy that. That needs to happen in a family.
Donors and volunteers actually have a lot of power to reverse the trend of orphanage trafficking simply by taking away the incentives, the ability to profit from donors, from volunteers, and from institutionalizing children.
We also need to legislate.
The proliferation of orphanages in many parts of the world is because governments fail to provide oversight in childcare and protection.
Legislators can introduce and pass comprehensive laws that categorise orphanage trafficking as a form of modern slavery. Such laws should include strong penalties for those involved in trafficking and also regulations against orphanage tourism and orphanage volunteering.
And laws enabling the criminality of businesses to be detected and their premises shut down, as well as court orders requiring convicted perpetrators to pay compensation to the victims.
Stopping orphanage trafficking actually requires the cooperation of countries that send volunteers and funding and countries where the orphanages are situated. Initiatives like travel advisories to warn of the harms of orphanage volunteering and tourism are also really important.
Legislators should ensure that trafficking laws in their countries criminalise orphanage trafficking.
We can also advocate through our platforms in the media and our areas of influence.
We must advocate for families. Instead of removing a child from their home, we should remove poverty from the home.
We need to advocate for increased home-based care in families to ensure that children are not being exploited in orphanages.
By collectively tackling the root causes, but also the consequences of orphanage trafficking, together we can work towards offering a much brighter future for some of the world's most vulnerable children.
Educate, legislate, advocate. What will you do to stop orphanage trafficking?
I'm just quickly going to take you through the just some of the tools that we use to highlight these issues that might be helpful for you, that you can follow up So just to say, yeah, just to reiterate what was said in the video, just visiting and volunteering in orphanages, it isn't possible to vet some people. It also normalizes access to vulnerable children. There's huge safeguarding issues and the attachment issues that were mentioned there in that video.
I don't think so.
The dignity of children having to perform very often,
Is there water on my desk?
confusion around culture and identity. So yeah, so and our practice in Ireland has changed. So why are we perpetuating something overseas? So the travel advice is there for you for afterwards. So we've found in our practice that it is much better to use GCE approaches to explore this issue. So the Just Care Just Volunteering resource, it's got 3 different sections. One, to gently open the box. We did the Menti there earlier in a word cloud. That's one of them. The second one then is just going a little bit deeper. So just to open the box a little bit more around the issues. So the quiz would be part of that, but you can have a look and see, and there's case studies and everything. And the other resource that we've just been given permission to use, which just people have found very helpful, is these slides here, and there'll be a QR code on the slides for you to see. But just again, a graphic helping people to actually look and see the problem, the impacts, just how orphanages can only ever be like a temporary solution, and just that the pathways of impact of volunteering in orphanages. So you can have a look at those at your leisure by looking at the slides afterwards, or by following the QR code that you'll see here. And if you look at the QR code as well, there's a list of frequently asked questions where you can just, at your leisure, have a look and just see there may be questions that arise for you that we may not be able to answer now, that you can have a look at those as well. So this QR code is there. It'll be on the slides that you'll receive afterwards. So I suppose in the terms of the call to action, we'd love in your GCE practice for you just to tip off this issue. You can refer people to us if you'd like us to do just an interactive workshop with your teams or with others you're involved with, or to give you tips about how to open the box, a workshop outline. But also to join in our advocacy with the government. If you've got any connections with the Department of Education, with educators, Irish Aid have already taken action. They no longer support any funding applications to do with childcare institutions. And they also have issued travel advice. We're delighted about that. But we're looking now for child safe guidelines for overseas school trips. So we'd love your support with that. But also on a personal level as well, you can go to this QR code and you can pledge not to volunteer or visit an orphanage yourself. You can share this around, and also this just to educate yourself more on these issues. So become an ally. An ally believes in resourcing and empowering and giving a platform to people like me so we can shape our own future. Sinead Chan, she's a care leaver from Cambodia who advocates on this issue, and she calls us to just no longer be white saviors, but become an ally. So that's the orphanage pledge for the Co-Love End Orphanage volunteering campaign. So just as we go into our Q&A section, one thing I'd be really grateful is just if this has been really, really quick session. I know that an awful lot of information, which hopefully you can go back and review, and just tipping off resources that are available on this issue. But I'd love to know one thing that you may have learned, maybe an action that you think you might take. It could even be as simple as educating yourself more on this issue, and then the questions you may have, but we can go to that in the Q&A session. One thing you've learned, one action you might take, a question you might have. That would be brilliant if you could share that in the chat box, just even for our feedback on this session. So thank you for bearing with me, and that's it.